What's up, everyone? This week on the pod, we have Keith Morris from Black Flag and Circle Jerks. Awesome long interview of me and Ben punishing him. I think you're going to like it. Also, Saturday, September 18th, 2021, Retaliate is back. So what's up? You got to come see us. We're playing as Dead Heat, Retaliate, Stalag 13, Out of Trust with Episode 1, The Legend Joe Rivas, Hiding Inside Victims, Torina, and a band that I cannot read their logo, so you know they're sick. It's going down at the OPAC, 800 Hobson Way, Oxnard, California. You got to check it out. Just go to the 185 Instagram. I'll post a flyer, and all the data's there. Dan, you wanted to say something as well, right?
Yeah. I'm putting my San Diego hat on now, and just want to say that we lost an absolute legend in San Diego music scene. And a legend in just how to be a very good person. Matt Hoyt passed away this week, and Matt, in the early 90s, had done a ska band called Turkey Mallet, and then from there he booked a little place in El Cajon called the Soul Kitchen that was an amazing place that allowed young up-and-coming punk bands to play their first shows at an actual venue, not just, backyard parties or whatever. And he was the nicest person then and acted the same way 20 plus years later. He's going to be a massive loss. He was co-owner of the Starlight Bar in San Diego, which is one of the most beautiful food and drink places in SD that nurtures that same kind of awesome subculture. So rest in peace and rest in power to Matt Hoyt. You will be very, very missed in San Diego and the world.
Yeah, rest in peace. Go to the website, 185milessouth.com. All our links are there. And that's that. I can't pitch after something like that. Let's hit the intro and go to Keith Morris. Thanks for saying all that, Dan. Much respect.
"185 Miles South," a hardcore punk rock podcast.
This week on the pod, we have Keith Morris. How you doing, Keith?
I'm doing pretty good, considering this weather is kind of it's a bit hot, but hey, worse things have happened. Hey, Ben, didn't we get rain earlier this morning?
I was not awake.
Okay.
I wake up late.
Slept through it.
Yeah.
Ben breaking the streak of his 6 a.m. jog. That's
Or for some street racing before everybody has to go to work.
That's true. The alarm clock of the neighborhood. All right. Keith, let's just jump right in. Got a twofer for you out the gate. How did you first hear punk music, and then how did you go about starting Black Flag?
Well, I was living in Hermosa Beach, and we had a record store up on Pacific Coast Highway, 8th and Pacific Coast Highway, called Music Plus. And they had a box of singles on the counter next to the cash register. And they would UK imports, mostly UK imports. So I remember, I did buy Patti Smith's single, Pissing in a River. And I also remember buying the Stranglers' first album on A&M. So I actually got the American release. Hooray for us, the USA, we're the greatest. But I bought stuff there before, like the first couple of Ramones albums, I guess the first Blondie album, who I don't really consider to be a punk band, because that New York scene very early on, all of the bands were all coming from different directions. The first Blondie album is kind of a girl pop, a little bit of an aggressive girl pop kind of situation. And the Talking Heads certainly were not a punk rock band. They were very much a new wave band. But of course, the Dead Boys, I did buy the Dead Boys' first album at the Music Plus.
And then Black Flag, how did that start? And so you're a fan of punk because you're buying these records at Music Plus just on a whim?
I'm not on a whim, but pretty much sometimes you would go in the record store and they might actually be playing some of the punk rock music, when they weren't playing the Eagles or when they weren't playing the cocaine wine sipping Fleetwood Mac. Plus, I had spent time working in record stores, so I was constantly listening to a wide array of music, whether it was prog rock or whether it was just straight up rock and roll like Mott the Hoople. I remember when I was working in and hanging out at a certain record store, hearing like Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars when that album came out. And I remember listening to Mott the Hoople's Brain Capers. If there was no Brain Capers, there would be no like Joneses and Mau Mau's. All of our punk rock bands that lean closer to like just a lean street rock kind of situation. I know that there would be no Zeros if there was no if Mott the Hoople didn't exist. So I was constantly aware of what was going on because I was also reading the press. I was reading Cream magazine. I was reading Circus magazine. Our local bookstore, either or, they were getting all of the British press, like what was it? Melody Maker, New Musical Express. So all of the British punk rock bands or the European punk rock bands, they were starting to show up in all of those publications.
Right. And then, so how do you meet Greg Ginn, etc., and then form this band?
Well, I also need to bring up one other extremely important scenario regarding how I was aware of some of these bands, and that was we had a radio show on Sunday nights, late on Sunday night, Rodney on the Rock. So we were hearing all of these bands. We were being exposed to all of these bands because that was what Rodney was playing at the time. So we have to applaud Mr. Bingenheimer. We also have to thank him because he was the only one playing any of this music on the radio.
Yeah, Keith,
Right.
can I jump in on you there? Do you think that part of Rodney's life was underrepresented in his documentary?
Well, I saw the documentary. I don't think I think I was watching the documentary out of my left eye while I was answering emails or something like that. So I didn't really pay that much attention. But Rodney has always turned people on to all sorts of music. Like at one point he was playing glitter, glam and glitter, pre-punk. There was a point in time here in LA where we were just, this was a musical wasteland. There was a point in time where like our biggest band would have been the Runaways and the Quick. And one of the bands at that time who really played a role in helping cement or create Black Flag was a band from Detroit called the Dogs, who still play to this day. You know, they were like a three-piece. They sounded somewhere between the MC5 and the Stooges and the Who, like just like stadium rock kind of stuff. So we thank them very much. We thank Mr. Molinier from the bottom of our hearts. So we had to go out and find other music to listen to. I mean, I said the Runaways, I said the Quick. We had Sparks, certainly a very important band here on the West Coast at one point. But none of these bands are punk rock bands. The Runaways, they wanted to mix it up with the Boys, but the Boys at that time were just playing like mid-tempo rock, mid-tempo radio rock. So we didn't have any punk rock bands. I mean, later on we would have like the Mau Maus. Later on we would have what I would consider our second wave of punk rock bands. And those would be all of the bands, you know, at one point we had a scene here in Hollywood that consisted of the Screamers and the Weirdos and the Eyes, the Controllers, the Bags, a few other bands. But the first wave of LA punk rock bands for me were part of the Laurel Canyon scene. Not everybody that came out of the Laurel Canyon scene were all flowery and acoustic, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and Buffalo Springfield and Mamas and the Papas and Joni Mitchell and James Taylor. You know, there were a handful of bands who actually had some angst and had some energy to some of the music that they played, like the Seeds. You could easily say Pushing Too Hard is a punk rock song. You listen to the lyrics, you listen to the intent, you listen to the pace of the song, and it's a punk rock song. It's very, very, very much part of the foundation to what a lot of us would go on to do. Arthur Lee and Love, they actually had a couple of tracks, My Little Red Book, you know, bom, 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 bom. That's pretty aggressive. That's pretty punk rock. The Standells, Dirty Water.
Of course. So you get the 60s wave of garage rock bands, and then at which you would consider some of them punk. You get the 70s punk proper mask scene with the Eyes and the Weirdos and the Screamers. And then in the South Bay, how does this thing happen that turns into Black Flag? How does this next generation like form?
Well, we sometimes found ourselves rubbing elbows with a lot of these bands up in Hollywood at the Mask, or over at a little bit later on the Starwood, or occasionally the Whiskey A Go-Go. And some of these bands would actually come down and play in the South Bay. We had a big room that I think held probably 700 or 800 people, called the Fleetwood. But getting back to Black Flag, we actually had started creating what we were creating, I want to say in very, very early 1977. Now, it took us a while to realize that, you know, we're playing in people's living rooms, we're playing in people's backyards. You know, we're paying to play when we would find a venue down in San Pedro and start removing the front seats, and then having the owner of the venue, the owner of the small movie theater say, "Oh no, you can't do that. You're going to have to go elsewhere." We were always scrambling, looking for places to play. You know, we would eventually play, I think, where we kind of put our stamp of, or showed off what we were doing, was at a picnic in a park on a Sunday afternoon down in Manhattan Beach. And we struggled to find places to play. I mean, you know, why would a punk rock band play a picnic in front of all of these families? Maybe because we didn't know any better. Maybe we didn't know that we were going to end up pissing off like 800 people, or, you know, getting people up in arms in our little community. We didn't have the wherewithal to go to the owner of Club 88 on Pico down in West LA and say, "Hey, we're a band. We'd love to play on Monday night. Let us be the opening band." You know, we would eventually convince that person to let us play as the Vegetable Farmers from Bakersfield. So we were scrambling to find places to play. If we had to rent a venue, or if we played the Moose Lodge on Pacific Coast Highway in Redondo Beach, we were constantly just scoping out various venues. Like I said, we didn't have the wherewithal to just like go to some of the bands and say, "Hey, why don't you put us on a bill when you play? You know, we'll be more than happy to be the opening band." That didn't really start happening for us until they started doing punk rock shows at the Hong Kong Cafe in Chinatown.
Right. So tell us about the recording of the Nervous Breakdown EP. What do you remember about doing that and the songs?
Well, that was crazy because the recording studio happened to be upstairs from a bar, and the bar apparently we didn't think this all the way through, because we were excited just to be going into a recording studio because we'd never done anything like that. And we're discovering that there's a band playing downstairs that's rattling the floorboards. Their sound is coming up into the second story, but we played at such a volume that it didn't really matter. The recording studio actually was about 4 doors south of where we were at the church on Manhattan Beach Boulevard. So we just rolled our equipment out the back door and down the alleyway, and maybe like 50 steps and our gear would be upstairs in the studio. Now, I do remember the quote from the guy that owned the studio, who was actually the engineer, because Spot was producing it, and we just kept playing. We didn't like take breaks. And Keith, how's your voice feeling? And I got to change a string, or I broke all my drumsticks. I need to find some other drumsticks, or I cracked one of my cymbals. We were not even worried about any of that. It's like, here we are, let's just play. And the studio owner, Dave Tarling, his quote was, they just kept coming. They just kept playing and playing and playing. I didn't know what to do.
Well, it sounds like he did know what to do, because that record is incredible.
Yeah, Keith, is it true that there's no, like, Greg's amp didn't have distortion and it just has that tone because it was turned up all the way to drown out the bar sound?
The way he worked was he was a novice when it came to amps. At one point, he was playing through my PA head. I owed him some money, and instead of paying him back what I owed him, I just gave him my PA. I had a PA system. I mean, it was rinky-dink, but it was all we knew because we weren't professional musicians. We had two of us had never been in bands before, and the two of us not being in bands would be Greg Ginn and myself. So we didn't know how, we didn't know that, you needed 100-watt amp to be louder than everybody else, and you turned it all the way up, and you turned every knob all the way to the right, and we're just going to be the loudest band we've ever heard. We didn't pay attention to any of that stuff. And in the recording situation, Greg and Chuck were so loud that, like I said, there was a band playing below us in the bar downstairs, and we very, very, very rarely heard them, maybe between a break of recording songs. But it was crazy because I want to say we recorded 16 songs, 14 songs.
Do those recordings?
We weren't there very long.
Do those recordings exist? If you recorded 16 songs, 4 are on the record. Is there a tape of the other 12 or so songs from that session somewhere?
Well, they showed up on Everything Went Black.
Oh, okay.
You guys, you just asked me that question, and you haven't been doing your homework.
I thought those were later. Sorry, I thought those were later sessions.
I thought I was talking to a couple of guys that think that Black Flag is the greatest band ever.
Keith, I'm glad that you were here to witness the biggest Ben whiff I've ever seen.
I don't think I'm whiffing though. Brian Migdal's not on Everything Went Black, but we can check the record later. Tell me, who are your influences as a singer, as a vocalist in Black Flag?
Well, my favorite Black Flag singer is Des Cadena, because he's got what Billy Stevenson calls the gator, like when he's just shredding his vocal cords. When Flag started playing, it was Billy Stevenson, being Mr. Quality Control, said, "Oh, no, Des, you're not going to sing like how you were singing in the Misfits." See, Glenn Danzig, he's got a like Jim Morrison, Elvis crooner type of vibe when he sings. Like he's actually singing. He's not shouting and screaming. So with Flag, Dezo thought he was going to come in approaching the songs the same way he approached everything when he was in the Misfits. And Billy was not going to have anything to do with any of that. It's like, dude, start smoking more cigarettes, start drinking some whiskey, Let's get some grating. We need to bust out the cheese grater and grind it in the back of your throat. But Dezo is my favorite Black Flag singer. At one point in time, I really loved Henry Rollins, but I actually spent some time with Henry. We did a tour for the West Memphis 3, and I appreciate the fact that they had me come along on that tour because I wasn't working at the time, and the work was great. I was vocalizing, I think, on maybe 8 to 10 Black Flag songs, so that was a lot of fun. But at one point, Henry invited Chuck the Duke and myself up to Henry's bomb shelter on the hill up in the Hollywood Hills. And when I say we, I mean Chuck Dukowski and myself were invited up to Henry Rollins' bomb shelter on the hill up in the Hollywood Hills. And of course, Chuck and I were in awe because the building, the concrete cinder block building, the bomb-proof building, was built by a guy who had started a magazine called Rip, which was kind of a metal magazine, but they dipped into speed metal, they dipped into punk rock, because they were crossing over and they wanted to keep their fingers in all pieces of the pie. And we, the three of us mutually agreed on a scenario where we were going to go to Spot and we were going to get all of the tapes, all of the Black Flag tapes. We were going to cook them or bake them, which is a situation where you do something to the recorded tapes to allow you to put them in the machine and run them through the machine one more time. So it could be a hit or miss type of situation where you're remixing the music. And then, of course, the music would be remixed and then it would be remastered for modern times. This was Henry's idea. So we were all like, yeah, we need to do this. So the three of us decided we were going to take it upon ourselves to create all of these modern mixes and remasters of all of the Black Flag albums, because everybody sitting around waiting for Greg Ginn and SST to do it, it was never going to happen. So in this process, Chuck and I looked at Henry and we both said, look, we're playing in a band called Flag, which means we go out and we play all of the songs that we played while we were in Black Flag. And Henry was okay with that. Henry would later go on to like bitch and complain about, well, they're acting like they're a bunch of 16-year-olds running around like they're 16-year-olds. These guys in their 60s, they think they're teenagers and blah, 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 blah. It was probably because he was probably jealous because we were doing it and we were having a great time and everybody that came to see us went fucking ape shit and it was just a beautiful thing. And we had a falling out because Greg Ginn went to get his hands into the trademarks for the 4 bars and the name. You know, you've got to go to Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia. The people that handle these situations are back there on the East Coast. And normally you put in your application to own the trademark, and it could take them up to a year, 2 years to get back to you. You know, it's just something they do, I guess, in their spare time or whatever. You know, that you just wait your turn in line. They got back to us. I think they got back to us in like 3 months. It was like, wow, that was fast for these people, because we'd heard all of these horror stories about how they move around and, you know, just take their time to let you know what's up. And they came back and they said, the name Black Flag is owned by a Japanese clothing company. The 4 bars, we are going to give you possession of the 4 bars. So we were kind of excited about that. We actually really needed the name, but it was taken by a Japanese clothing company, which obviously meant that Greg Ginn thought, well, I'm SST and I'm Black Flag, and everybody, when they talk about Black Flag, they always talk about me first. And, you know, I wrote all of these songs, and, you know, I put all of the music out, and I got the record company, and I'm folding my arms, and nobody can touch me, and nobody's going to try to trademark any of these marks because I own them. And obviously he didn't. You know, obviously he didn't pay attention to, you know, somebody's going to come along and swoop on these. And then occasionally, this happens quite a bit with websites. Kiss is notoriously famous for this, where they were going in the, all of a sudden, REO Speedwagon's website has not been claimed. And so Kiss claims it for whatever it cost, the $300 or the $500 that you would pay for a trademark, and then turn around and go to REO Speedwagon and say, look, you want your trademark? We'll sell it back to you. We're asking $10,000 or whatever they ask. I don't know, which seems like a really sleazy thing, but that also seems like something that Gene Simmons would pull off. That seems like something in his bag of tricks. Anyways, we were given the 4 bars. And so when I say we, I mean Flag, we're going out and we're playing some shows. We're going to go out. We're going to tour. We're going to take this out there. We're going to have fun. And so Ginn has Black Flag at the time. And we were hearing a lot of reports that there were a ton of people that weren't digging on what Greg Ginn was doing. And I didn't listen to any of it. I was just, you know, I was kind of over whatever Ginn was doing, because he sued us. He sued first. He sued Henry and I, and this is when Henry started talking whatever garbage he was talking about us. Obviously, not thinking that, you know, Chuck Dukowski and I were in Black Flag before Dez, before Ron, before he was in Black Flag. So he was basically talking crap about a couple of guys that were in the band way before him. You know, obviously providing him the opportunity to be in a band. You know, after I left, after Ron left, after Dezo decided that he couldn't sing anymore. And it got ugly. And all we did was we kept our mouths shut. You know, like, why were we going to be talking any garbage about Henry Rollins? He's Henry Rollins. Nobody talks bad about Henry Rollins. They're going to get their faces crushed.
Right.
Yeah. I appreciate you talking about all the different singers, because that's always very interesting. But for you personally,
you know what? At one point, Henry was my favorite, because I loved if he did 300 songs with Black Flag, I loved at least 150 of them. I thought some of it was just kind of filler, and I thought some of it was just kind of hokey, but that's okay, because when he was on My War, my favorite track with him is Paralyzed. And I also love Ron Reyes. He and I were beer drinking buddies at the church, and I got to see him play drums with Red Cross probably at least a dozen times. So we were party buddies. I have nothing bad to say about Dezo. I have nothing bad to say about Ron Reyes. And all of the bad stuff that I have to say about Henry Rollins, I will just keep my mouth shut. I don't want to come off sounding like some pathetic, whiny ass crybaby.
Yeah, but on the positive side, though, Keith, who influenced you directly, like your singing style that you brought to the table on Nervous Breakdown?
Well, I love John Lennon and Paul McCartney. I love Ray Davis, or you could say Ray Davies, who is the vocalist of the Kinks. I love Roger Daltrey, who's the vocalist of The Who. I love Lauren Molinaire, who is the vocalist in The Dogs. Oh, Iggy, Mr. Pop, Alice Cooper. I have a whole long list of people. I could go into some places that, well, he's a punk rock vocalist. I'm not a singer, I'm a vocalist. And there are all of these places that I could go, but those are my main influences. Ian Hunter and Mott the Hoople, David Bowie. These are all people that I love and admire. And you would think, well, he doesn't sound anything like any of those people. Maybe Iggy. Somebody brought up Crocus Behemoth from the Electric Eels from Cleveland. Somebody said, well, that's where Keith Morris stole his vocal style. And it was like, no, sorry, pal. I'm not even going to respond to you on Facebook.
I hear Johnny Rotten a little. Am I off?
Well, Johnny Rotten happened to be very, very popular amongst the punk rocks at the time. All of the punk rocks would get together and they would listen to the Sex Pistols. And there is a bit of that.
Right.
It's just unavoidable because of the time, right? Like, it's just in the ether, the Johnny Rotten thing. Anyway.
It's there. How can you avoid it?
Right. Keith, what does it mean when you say, I was so heavy, man, I lived on the Strand?
A couple of friends of mine living down in Hermosa Beach, we had a friend who was working up at the LA Zoo. And our friend at the LA Zoo, had access to the tranquilizer that they were using to put some of the animals asleep. Like if they had some kind of an emergency, rather than killing an animal, they would just shoot it with a dart and put it to sleep. And so our friend was stealing animal tranquilizer out of I guess it would be the animal pharmacy at the LA Zoo. And we were we were snorting animal tranquilizer. And one night we snorted some up and we walked 30 miles on the Strand. Like we walked to, I want to say, Dockweiler Beach, which is down by the LA airport, LAX. And I think we did that maybe 5 or 6 times. That's how high we were. And we were laughing and carrying on and smoking cigarettes and drinking beer and getting all goofy. And that was pretty ridiculous. And that was just some of our experimental youth situations. That was one of them. And that was I was so heavy, I lived on the Strand. I spent quite a bit of time on the Strand, like during my lunch break when I was working for my dad down by the Hermosa Pier. Then we lived at 9th Street and Beach Drive, which is the alleyway separating the houses from the Strand. And Wasted, basically, is just my history of growing up in Hermosa Beach and the South Bay.
Right. Speaking of the South Bay, you have this Hollywood scene, and then you have the South Bay scene, which is you guys, Black Flag, and then you start getting all these other scenes springing up in Southern California, like Fullerton with Adolescents and Rick Agnew and all those bands, and then
Distortion.
Yeah, Huntington Beach.
Class. Don't forget the middle class, because they were many consider them to be the first hardcore band in Southern California.
Yeah,
many punk rock historians consider the middle class of Orange County to be the first hardcore band. And if it wasn't the middle class, it was the Germs.
Right. So how would you differentiate the different, like the personalities of these different scenes going into these communities? Like, how was South Bay different than Hollywood, and how were those different than Fullerton or Huntington Beach?
Okay, we weren't different from Huntington Beach or Costa Mesa. We were part of a beachfront community. Now, living at the beach and being part of this community, that meant that we did a lot of body surfing if we weren't surfing, because I surfed a couple of times and said, this ain't for me. I'm not getting up at 4:35 in the morning to go out and put on a wetsuit and go out in like 40-degree water and freeze my ass off with a handful of friends before school, because we had to be at, this was during high school, we had to be at school by 8 a.m., and be seated in our class. I wasn't going to do that. Maybe I was just too lazy, but I love body surfing, and I love skateboarding. And that was part of our community. That was very influential on what we were doing, because we were surrounded by all of these athletes, and they're not Jocko, like Devo Jocko homos. We weren't like football players and basketball players. I mean, we would play all of that stuff, but we play it in the sand, or we play it with a handful of friends over at Clark Stadium, but not like on the high school jock. Yeah, I'm the quarterback on the senior team, and I get to have sex with all of the drill team members. That's the reason why we called them the drill team, all of that fun, goofy garbage. We were surrounded by athletes, surfers, skaters, skateboarders. I'm kind of losing track here, but we had one of the greatest ski movie makers in Hermosa Beach, and that would be Warren Miller. And I went to school with his daughter. His daughter was totally cool. But what is the progression? Okay, we're in wintertime and it's foggy, or it's raining, or there's no waves. There's no shape, nothing to surf. We're going to grab our skis and we're going to go up to the nearest mountain, Big Bear, what have you. So you have all of these athletes, and eventually you would have Olympic sports because of some of this stuff. And yet they're athletes. They're not jocks. They don't have that kind of shitty mentality. So we're around all of these people who, some of them are constantly moving. Some of them are constantly like checking out the surf. There's no surf. I'm going to go do some skateboarding, you know, up at the high school, you know, up near the benches and on the basketball court, the asphalt basketball courts. So we were surrounded by these people who had a mentality of go for it. You know, there's some waves. Let's do this. Let's not stand around and try to figure out which way the wind's blowing or how big the waves are. There's some shape out there. Let's go. Consequently, we grew up with some of these people, and that became part of our mentality. Even though we weren't surfers, we did enough of some of those other things. And that aggressive attitude spilled over into what we were doing musically, if you want to call it music, because there's a lot of people that wouldn't call what we did music. Turn that noise off. So
would you say, you mentioned Middle Class earlier and how a lot of people consider them the first hardcore band. Would you say that there was a middle stage that happened between the original punk scene and then what became known as hardcore? Was there something in between those things? Was it a gradual evolution?
It was the punk scene had to change. I mean, it was inevitable, because what was happening was you had Hollywood, and then all of a sudden you started to have these flare-ups in all of these other suburban areas. You know, there were bands out in Riverside, there were bands out in the Valley. You know, a perfect example of a band that bridged the Hollywood punk scene to the hardcore scene would be Fear. They obviously were a hardcore band. What did they want?
Yeah. So
all of a sudden, you started having all of these people coming into Los Angeles, coming into Hollywood from all of these other areas, and they're all bringing some of their mentalities along with them. Sadly, a lot of them had this brain seizure called, let's just fuck everything up. Fuck this shit. Let's just fuck it up. Which was very easy for them to do because they were coming from all of these faraway places. You know, they were coming from areas that were 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 miles away. And it was real easy for them just to show up and tear urinals off the wall and break windows and toss bottles at the police.
Right.
Actually, a really interesting point. Like, because people are traveling now and they're fucking up places that they don't live. Like, they can tear the urinal off because they don't have to pee there tomorrow, right?
That's correct.
Keith,
totally correct.
Do you remember the first time that you saw someone stage dive?
I don't, because I in the very beginning of all of that, first it was the worm and the pogo, and then it started to get a little bit more aggressive when all of these people from all of these other outlying areas started to show up, because a lot of them, you know, in the beginning there was the scene in Hollywood was a clique that equated to about 300 people. And with each show that passed, the crowd started getting bigger. There were more people showing up, some just out of interest. You know, like I read about this and it seems very interesting to me. And I'm going to just stand back here and I'm going to be the intellectual person that I am, or, you know, that the intellectual person would be accompanied by a few people that decided that they were going to jump around. And then all of a sudden you have the skaters. If you look at the skank dance or the slam dance or the Southern California slam or whatever, whatever anybody is calling it, it's basically a kid on a skateboard. And now all of a sudden you have a perfect example of this being Tony Alva and all of those guys that skate on his team and are part of his skate team coming to Hollywood and coming to like Central LA, just basically bringing their mentality along with them. Plus, we live in Southern California, which is one of the swimming pool capitals of the world, if not the swimming pool capital of the world. And what do you do at a swimming pool? Well, doesn't the side of a swimming pool, when you're diving off of the lip of the swimming pool, resemble a stage? There's all of these people who are supposed to catch you when you're diving off the stage. Now, I've seen crowds split open like the Red Sea, part like the Red Sea, and people stage diving and landing flat on their faces on the cement floor. I feel sorry for them, but at the same time, if you're doing something like that and you're up for the challenge and you're a daredevil, well, instead of diving off the stage, I'm going to dive off the balcony. I hope those guys catch me. I hope they put their hands up and prevent me from splattering my face and knocking all of my teeth out and breaking my nose and all of that fun shit. I mean, I did see the results of a stage dive up in Goleta Valley when Gary Tovar and Golden Voice started doing their first shows. And I believe it was, I want to say it was the Misfits and the Circle Jerks, when somebody dove off of something they shouldn't have jumped off of and ended up breaking their leg in like 16 places. Like one of the major bones just like ripped and poked its way through his pants, and all of the blood and all of the carnage and the wreckage and destruction and all of that fun stuff. Yeah, that had to hurt.
Yeah. Well, I have a quick question about you when you were in Black Flag and when you were in the Circle Jerks. What did you, as a band, define the style of music you played as? What did you say? We are a band that plays this kind of music. What would that have been?
I really don't know what we called ourselves or how we categorized ourselves, because we weren't paying attention to any of that. We were playing music. We were frustrated. We were depressed. We were all of the things that we were singing about in the lyrics. We were angry because it did take a while for us to finally become friends with a lot of the bands up in Hollywood. So with Black Flag, we were like a ball of energy, and we would play and we would not pay attention to like what was going on in front of us. People could have been blowing stuff up. People could have been setting stuff on fire. We didn't care. Now, with the Circle Jerks, we kind of resembled maybe just slightly the Dickies, who were, I never considered the Dickies to be a punk rock band. I considered the Dickies to be like a Saturday morning cartoon kind of band. Great players, great songs, but I never considered them to be a punk rock band. I think the only way that you would really consider the Dickies to be a punk rock band was just at the pace they were playing at, their tempos. I mean, Nights in White Satin, that's not a punk rock song. The Banana Split, that's not a punk rock song. That's just a fun. That's what the Dickies were. The Dickies were fun. The Dickies weren't going to beat you over the head and tell you to go out and blow shit up and set police cars on fire and let's riot and let's get laid and all of that kind of stuff. They just weren't that band. Now, the Circle Jerks, we kind of resembled the Dickies, but our credo, our mentality was we just want to play. We just want to have fun, and we want to have a good time. We want to be the guys. We want to be at the party, and we want to be the first ones at the keg. And if push comes to shove, as we're drinking from our cup, what we just pumped out of the keg, we'll stand there. We'll fill a few people's cups up. We were there for the girls. We were there for the drugs. We were there just for the party scene.
Right.
Keith, is there a moment in Black Flag that you think is like your peak of when you were in it? Like, is there an apex moment when you're like thinking back on it, like this was the most awesome thing that happened or time?
I actually was, for the most part, I was enjoying my time in Black Flag, even though towards the end, we were starting to fight a lot of arguments. I was always losing the arguments. So it was real easy for me to walk away. I would eventually have Chuck Dukowski tell me Greg Ginn wanted to fire me, but Greg Ginn didn't have the balls to come to me and tell me that I was no longer in the band because I was one of the founding members. And how difficult of a situation would that place him in? So I quit and made it real easy for him. I had probably at least a handful of shows where I actually really had a blast, had a great time. The band became this working man's, we've got to be on a schedule. If we're not playing, we're rehearsing. And so consequently, there were weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks where we were rehearsing like 5, 6, 7 times a week. And my situation was, well, I'd like to go and see some other bands. I'd like to go hear some other music. I'd like to go and hang out with a handful of people that I've made friends with up in Hollywood. Let's go to the Mask, or let's go to the Starwood, or let's go to the Whiskey A Go Go. I remember after one rehearsal, I said, let's cut this short. Let's go up and see AC/DC at the Whiskey A Go Go. And everybody in the band, all 4 of us, that would be Robo, including Robo, they all thanked me for like talking them into going and seeing AC/DC on the Let There Be Rock.
So Keith, after
Let there be guitars.
So many guitars. Keith, after the Circle Jerks get going, do you ever play shows with Black Flag, and do you feel like that there was a rivalry at all?
There was a rivalry, but we actually, I want to say, we might have played with Black Flag 3 or 4 times. I mean, it was fun. It was very iffy. And what I mean by that is those guys did not like me when I left the band, except for Robo. I would actually, at one point, much later on, hang out with Robo for about half an hour. And he said, the band was never the same when you left.
In what way do you think, Keith?
Well, obviously, because Robo was there for Didn't Robo actually make it into? Robo actually made it into Henry Rollins' time, so he got to play with all of the other guys. And obviously, I was his favorite vocalist.
Right.
So tell me about forming the Circle Jerks. How did that come to be?
Well, it was actually very easy because I believe I was out of Black Flag for a couple of weeks, and there are two different stories as to how the Circle Jerks actually started. I'll give Greg Hetson's version first. Greg Hetson was still a member of Red Cross, and they held an audition for Lucky in, it was either Jeffrey's bedroom or Steven's bedroom over in Hawthorne. And they did not like Lucky. See, coming from having Ron Reyes playing drums, Ron Reyes was sloppy. Ron Reyes he had kind of like a punk rock New York Dolls kind of vibe. And that's kind of what they wanted. And Lucky wasn't that guy, because Lucky comes from big band swing and jazz, Louis Bellison and Buddy Rich and guys like that. And he was too proficient on the drums. And the McDonald brothers didn't like that. And so I would run into both Lucky and Greg in front of the Whiskey A Go-Go. And that's when the three of us started talking. And Greg said, yeah, I just quit Red Cross because they wouldn't let Lucky play in the band. And I'm looking at them, and in this conversation, I'm thinking, well, I'm not in a band right now, and I'm looking at a drummer and a guitar player. And now all we need to do is just find a bass player, and we could be a band. Okay, that would be the Greg Hetson version. The Keith Morris version would be, I was still living in the church after I'd quit Black Flag. Ron Reyes lived in the basement. Ron Reyes allowed the McDonald brothers and Greg Hetson to continue practicing or doing whatever they were doing as a band in his space. And my recollection is that I was drinking beer and listening to them rehearse. In this rehearsal, they were auditioning Lucky. And I'm listening to it going, this sounds really cool. Now I was probably 6 beers in, and maybe I made this story up in my head, but the door flies open. Greg Hetson's the first one out. Lucky's the second one out. The McDonald brothers, they're not coming out at that point. And I look up because I'm sitting on the ground in the hallway leading to the space. And I look up and it's Greg, and I said, so what's happening, man? That sounded really, really cool. That was really happening. And Greg looks at me and he said, we just auditioned Lucky. They don't want to play with Lucky. He's too good of a drummer for Red Cross. And the machinery in my head starts going off, and it's like, well, why don't we start a band? I'm a vocalist. You're a guitar player. Lucky's a drummer. Now all we need to do is find a bass player. Anyways, whatever story you choose to latch onto, it's all okay. Because a couple of weeks after whichever situation you want to adhere to, I met Roger Rogerson, outside of one of the clubs. He comes walking up, and he's got a 40 ouncer in a paper bag, and he said, "You care for a sip of my Budweiser?" And I said, "Well, hell yeah, I'm thirsty. What do you do?" "I'm a bass player." He's actually a guitar player, but he at this point in time, he's passing himself off as a bass player. It's like, wow. I know a band situation. You want to become a member of this band? These are the guys we would be playing with. And the rest was all downhill from there. Young man on the downhill slide.
The song Red Tape, which is on the first Circle Jerks album, was that originally a Black Flag song?
The lyrics I had written while I was in Black Flag. So the lyrics would have been used in a Black Flag song, except that over the course of my 3 years being in Black Flag, there was a power situation or an ego tripping situation that for about the first year and a half, it didn't exist. Gen's ego situation didn't really start up until about halfway through my time in the band. And that would have been when Chuck Dukowski became the bass player. He said, "I'll join this band, but we're going to rehearse. We're going to be rehearsing left and right, up and down, in and out. It's going to be part of our mantra. How late are we going to rehearse to tonight? You know, I don't get off of work. I got to close my dad's shop at 9. I could be up here at 9:10. You know, that'll give me just enough time to stop at the liquor store and grab a 6-pack."
Right.
And so Gen starts, I guess, digging his feet in as to who's the leader of the band. And, you know, don't question what I say. It started right about the time, I'd say probably a couple of months after Chuck joined, because that's when we became a band. You know, we'd pretended we were a band. We'd already gone through Spot in Kansas and Raymond Pettibone, and we didn't really become a band until Chuck Dukowski joined. And then he started up the practice regiment, which was, for me, kind of a bummer, because I wanted to go out and socialize. It was like, I love this band, but could we maybe have a night off? Could we have a couple of nights off during the week to a point where we could actually load up the van and drive up and see 4 or 5 bands at one of the venues?
Right.
Yeah, Keith, how do you get on the Rodney on the Rock comp? And whose idea was it to do a cover song?
And when I say we, the Circle Jerks, we were very fortunate because a lot of people knew me from Black Flag. And all of a sudden, our rise to punk rock superstardom, our ascent, was, in the beginning, it was pretty easy. You know, we would go to play at the Starwood. We would go play the Whiskey A Go-Go. All of a sudden, we're having all of these different bands asking us to play with them. Dead Kennedys and X, and you know, we played. I think we played a handful of shows at the Hong Kong Cafe. It was, for us, getting gigs was easier than when we started Black Flag. We weren't as naive when it came to going to a promoter and saying, "Hey, why don't you put us on a bill?" why don't you put us on the bill with Black Flag and Fear and the Minutemen? That was the night that is right up here on Sunset Boulevard where the Home Depot is now. That used to be, there was a venue that sat there called the Stardust Ballroom. And the Circle Jerks actually played there twice. And one of the times we played, we headlined and filled the place. So our rise to, like I said, punk rock superstardom was, it happened a lot quicker than it happened for Black Flag. And we were fun-seeking, partying. Let's have a great time. We played our share of parties. We played our share of backyards. We played up on a cliff up in Malibu for Lucky's younger sister's, like, 12th birthday or whatever it was. I remember we played that party and I was drunk and I yelled over the PA, "Bong Ludes," to like all of these kids from her school. Yeah, we would just do goofy shit like that. We were able to get away with a bunch of goofy garbage like that.
Keith,
And
you talk about wanting to like socialize more, and Hetson's always been known as like a guy that's always like gone to shows and supported other bands. Was there any camaraderie between like the punk bands of this time, like circa 1980, and was there any camaraderie with Black Flag and other bands? And then also, like, when you leave and do the Circle Jerks, do you feel that was like something that you really wanted, was some more camaraderie, like going out and supporting other people instead of just practicing all the time?
Well, we had made friends with a lot of people in a lot of bands. We had made friends with a lot of the people that were just showing up to the shows. So we weren't discerning between who was important and who wasn't important. Let's make friends. Let's be part of this social circle. It didn't matter what bands were playing. We were going to be there and we were going to have fun, whether anybody else wanted to or not. The same thing with Black Flag. We just wanted to expand our circle. And ultimately, we loved a lot of the bands that we would go see. Now, there would be bands we would go to see that we didn't care for, but that didn't matter because at the end of the day, you strip off all of this band junk and you're just a human being. And if you're a good human being, then why wouldn't you want to be friends with other good human beings?
Right. So going back to the song "Wild in the Streets," Garland Jeffries did that originally. Whose idea was it to have you got Circle Jerks do a Garland Jeffries cover? It seems kind of maybe a little random, but maybe he was a big deal back then. I don't know.
He wasn't that big of a deal. And there were a couple of other rock bands that had done covers of Wild in the Streets. And both of them, their versions were being played on K-Rock. I mean, they weren't in heavy rotation, but I'd heard this guitar player named Chris Spedding, who worked with the Sex Pistols on their first recordings. I heard his version on K-Rock. And I also heard at one point, Mott the Hoople became Mott, and then Mott became the British Lions. And the British Lions version of Wild in the Streets was also occasionally being played on K-Rock. Now, neither of these versions of Wild in the Streets were in heavy rotation. they would have been in like very light rotation. Now we did a cover because we sped it up. We brought the tempo up to pogo dancing, doing the worm and stage diving and all of that fun stuff. And we were fortunate that K-Rock was doing a lunchtime show where they play local punk rock bands. So you could hear Agent Orange. You could hear all of the bands that are on that Rodney on the Rock. You could hear all of those bands being played on K-Rock during lunchtime. Adolescents, Amoeba, Black Flag.
Right. And
Agent Orange, Bloodstains.
And then tell me what it was like being on that comp, being that Rodney was so important for your discovery of punk, and now you're asked to be on this comp that is the first Rodney thing, and then this guy Robbie Fields comes in to put out the record, Posh Boy Records. What was the situation there?
Well, all of the guys we're all, there's three of us that are short, like 5'5", 5'6", and our bass player is the tallest. But on the Rodney on the Rock album, because our version of Wild in the Streets is so short, we're maybe we take up about 3/4 of an inch, maybe half an inch on the recording. So we're only that tall compared to some of the other bands. We're just three short Jews. That being on that compilation helped us out because kids all over the country were eventually going to be, they would be able to have access to the recording. We were actually, and when I say we, I mean the Circle Jerks, we were going to record our album for Posh Boy. And he put us in a studio out in North Hollywood in the middle of the summer with no air conditioning. And normally, if you're in an extremely hot studio recording, especially a recording studio, you want to try to keep your recording gear cool. You don't want your recording gear being in 100-degree weather. And that was what the room was. And we ended up recording Wild in the Streets. And I don't think we even recorded anything else.
Keith, I know that song on the album was very important for like people hearing the band and your popularity, but was it like personally important to you? Like, do you have any feeling of being sentimental because Rodney was so important in exposing you to punk and now you're on his comp? That's more my question.
Well, we appreciate the fact that he would have us on his comp. I think Posh Boy played a big role in choosing some of the bands that were going to be part of the comp. But it was also kind of like a business card. It was the same thing that happened with the Circle Jerks with being in Penelope Spheeris's documentary, The Decline of Western Civilization. All of a sudden, that movie is being shown in all of these other cities around the U.S., making it easy for us to have somebody call the promoter and say, "Hey, where do you want us to play? How much can you pay us? Yeah, we'll play for a couple $100, or we'll play for 50% of the door, or whatever the deal was." It was very important for us to be on both of those, the doc and the comp.
Can you talk about the
And
recording?
what it did was it opened doors for us.
Right. Can you talk about the recording of Group Sex? And you go in and do this record and do not have a record label behind it already. Is that correct?
We actually had done a deal with a recording studio, and it wasn't really a recording studio. It wasn't a big deal kind of recording studio. It was a voiceover studio on the Desilu lot down in Culver City. And the deal was we weren't told in advance what the recording schedule was. It was like we were waiting around for them to call us when they had any kind of spare time, any kind of open time. So we could be racing down to this lot to get into this room to set up our equipment and only have 2 hours of recording time because they had to have voiceover recordings in the morning, and then after lunch there was 3 hours, and then I remember going in there one day and Jeff Bridges was in there. He was actually playing piano. So it was just a situation where we were bouncing around. Like, are we going to record today? So it was kind of like Greg Hetson and I were sitting at the phone, waiting for the phone to ring, hoping that it was these people letting us know that we have 3 hours starting at 3. Can you be here at 3? You know, and this went on over the course of a couple of weeks. But the situation was we didn't have the money to record. One of Lucky's friends, who we call the producer, in the barter system, gave up a shopping bag of some dirt weed.
Right on. So the album is recorded and you don't have a label to put it out, right? Because you're not going with Posh Boy. And so then how does Frontier get involved into this?
We did not like Posh Boy. We learned to dislike Posh Boy just by being around Posh Boy. And you can hear some horror stories. You could talk to Mike Palm from Agent Orange. He would let you know some business dealings with Posh Boy. I'm not gonna sit here and say he's great or he's horrible. It's that there's enough people that have done business dealings with him that can tell you what his situation is. We had done this recording, and we were very fortunate. Lisa Fancher approached us. You guys want to do a recording? She'd already put out the Flyboys, so she was in her incubation stage of creating her record label. And she came to us. We were extremely popular in Los Angeles at the time, so it made sense for her to do this. And our contract, I believe, was like a page and a half. And of course we said yes. I mean, what else were we going to do? You know, and things were moving really fast. Things were moving really quick. Things were snowballing for us. And so it just made perfect sense. And she presented herself in a way it's like, she's perfect for us. This is great. You know, we're like her second band. And our record, when it came out, was so popular that she made enough money off of our recording to sign the Adolescents, to sign TSOL, to sign Suicidal Tendencies. And then she would have success with all of these bands, especially Suicidal Tendencies, because Suicidal Tendencies made a video for Institutionalized, and that got regular airplay on MTV. That equates to that album probably, in its first handful of months, had to sell about 50, 60, 70,000 copies. You have all of that advertising, all of that free advertising on MTV, and millions and hundreds of thousands of people seeing that. That was brilliant.
Keith, when Group Sex comes out, how do you feel about it as an album, like as an accomplishment? And can you compare it to how you felt when Nervous Breakdown came out?
If I'm looking at it as an accomplishment, I'm just thinking we were lucky. We were very fortunate to be able to make that record how we made it. And when it came out, its popularity, and then leading to being played on Rodney on the Rock, just all of these very, what's the word I want to use? Very organic. It was like we didn't have a manager. We didn't have anybody telling us, well, this is what you have to do to get to where you need to go. If you want to be up here, or if you want to just continue to be down here, and, then don't do any of it. But we managed in our situation of the blind leading the blind, the deaf speaking to the deaf, of just navigating our way through all of this.
Right. But as far as the art itself, right, you thinking about the artistic output of the album, not the popularity and not what it's going to do, but how do you connect with like the art itself?
Oh, wow. Well, it was just who we were at the time. Just a bunch of guys getting together and banging out, and swiping riffs here and there, and like 2 or 3 of the songs, the lyrics had already been written while I was in Black Flag.
I think that's... Oh, sorry.
I don't really think in terms of Group Sex being any artistic masterpiece. I mean, it's basically, I could sit here and just say, well, it was the most genius record anybody has ever created, and fuck everybody else. And the Circle Jerks, they're just so amazing, and nobody could touch us. And we were like in this situation where we were bulletproof, and it was just the most amazing thing. But it's like I never sit around and think about any of this kind of stuff. It is what it is. It happened. And we're just thankful, like I'd said earlier, just thankful about how all of this transpired.
Right, but
like
I could
we probably should have never made a recording. There were no major labels, there were no minor labels. I mean, if you want to call Posh Boy Presents or whatever his label is, a real record label, because you would talk to a lot of the artists that he has put out over the years, and there are certain people, I know this of Greg Ginn, that are just like, they should be thankful that I put the record out. They should show me respect. And it's like, What kind of fucking mentality is that? That's really messed up. And like, I'm doing them a favor by putting their record out. You know how much this is costing me? And I'm not going to tell anybody what I've made in return, because it only allowed me to sign all these other bands, and it was like before anybody knew their business practices. But getting back to my thoughts on group sex, I don't have a lot of thoughts on group sex.
But I think you kind of hit on what I was looking for, right? Because you say, like, it's just what we did. It's who we are. So then if you think that album is an accurate representation of that, then it should be objectively considered a great piece of art, don't you think?
A time capsule.
Right.
I would be interested in seeing what would happen if you were in an art gallery. Speaking of art, see, because normally when I think of art, before I think of television and movies and music and ceramics and pottery and jewelry making, metal smithing, I think of standing in an art gallery with a big white backdrop, maybe even just a white wall rather than a canvas, just a big white wall. And I've actually seen artwork like this because one of the major museums here, not far from my house, had a Raymond Pettibone exhibit where they actually let him come in and draw and paint stuff on the walls. Like they gave him 3 walls in a section of the museum. And he had artwork that he'd already created that he brought in with him and put on the walls. And then he took one wall and just started drawing and painting stuff. And there was one of the idea was that it was supposed to be like an office setting. So there were a couple of desks in the space. And one of the things that he drew was you have these pads, these pink pads that are what I need to do today, or what's on my list of things to accomplish today, or what should I do today. And he had drawn the pink pad, and on it he wrote, like he'd written in pencil or pen, tell the boss to go fuck himself. Things to do today. My list of things to do today. Tell the boss to go fuck himself. And then some of the other things on the wall were like inter-office comic Xeroxes. Like there was the situation with Saddam Hussein on the camel, with the camel had the Scud missile up its ass, with some kind of saying like, this is what you can do with your Scud missile, or something like that. The majority of it was all based on like being in an office, like inter-office communications, these Xeroxes and notes written to all of the other people in the office. But here we are in an art gallery. And like I said, you have the white wall as opposed to a big white, jumbo white canvas. And you take all 4 circle jerks and you shoot us. You don't give us helmets, no pads, just shoot us out of a cannon and let us hit the wall, and whatever happens, blood splatter, whatever we're wearing, the blood sliding down the wall. That would be my idea of what the circle jerks would represent artistically.
Amazing. How come the second record you leave Frontier for another label? What happens there?
all sorts of fun stuff. Faulty Products. Was it Faulty Products?
Yeah.
See, you guys, I don't sit around thinking about, well, we went from Frontier Records to Faulty Products to Combat Core, Important Records to Mercury Records, or wherever we went. I don't care about all of this stuff. To me, it's all meaningless. It's just all part of the path that we travel to get to wherever we're at. So to ask me, well, what I thought of what it was like crossing the bridge from Frontier Records to Faulty Products, it's like, dude, I'm in a party mode. I'm drinking beer till it's pouring out my nostrils. I'm snorting so much coke, I'm looking for the dealer. It's like, my objective is not to be creative with the circle jerks and be signed to a fun-loving record label. I mean, granted, we went from being in somebody's living room to being on the A&M lot, which at one time was Charlie Chaplin soundstage, and A&M Records at one point being one of my favorite record labels in the world, because they put out Procol Harum, they put out The Move, they put out Free, they put out Spooky Tooth, Humble Pie, a lot of my favorite bands back in the 70s. So you have to remember, I'm 66 years old. I listened to so much music before the punk rock stuff.
Right.
Before that stuff was happening. You know, occasionally somebody on Facebook was like, so what did you listen to before punk rock? And, you know, most of the people are like, well, we listened to The Swede, and we listened to Slade, and we listened to Susie Quattro, and we listened to glam rock and the New York Dolls. And I listened to so much more music before that, because my music listening history goes all the way back to sitting in the front seat of my mom's car when she's playing KROA or KHJ. So I go all the way back to the Supremes and the Temptations and the Seeds and Mamas and the Papas and all sorts of fun stuff.
Yeah.
That was a great answer for a question you didn't like.
Well, getting back to that bridge between the two record labels, it was kind of a situation where you're standing at the light switch, and you turn the light switch is off, so there's no light in the hallway. And then you flick the switch up, the light goes on, and that's being a part of A&M, because we were originally brought to the record label by one of the main guys at A&M. He was like third or fourth in charge, David Anderley. He's no longer with us, R.I.P. Great guy. He saw the Circle Jerks at the Starwood. Our manager at the time, Gary Hurstis, who was the guy that did all of the live sound recording for Decline of Western Civilization, introduces me to David Anderley. This is about half an hour after we got through playing, after we played our second set that night at the Starwood. I'm introduced to David Anderley, and David Anderley immediately says, I've got to record you before you kill yourself. And that was our conversation. And the next thing we know, we're members of, we weren't even on IRS. We weren't even big enough to be on IRS, which was certainly, they were a step down from A&M Records, which is who David Anderle worked for. But even with IRS, at that time, it was the police. And the police would eventually be on A&M Records because the police were getting played everywhere. The police were part of our vocabulary, and not just fuck the police, but don't walk so close to me, or canary in a coal mine, or whatever their hits were, Roxanne, or what have you. Faulty Products eventually petered out for us because the people that worked for them, the people that worked for IRS, who were responsible for how we were treated at the label, they loved us. They welcomed us. They welcomed us into their offices. Granted, I was doing a bunch of stuff that was beyond lame and ridiculous, really uncool stuff, but they loved us up until a certain point when we actually met Miles Copeland, who was the owner of IRS Records, who happened to manage a handful of bands. And one of the bands he managed was a band called Chelsea. And I was never a big fan of Chelsea. I thought they were good. I didn't think they were great. I just thought they were good. And we had this sit-down meeting, and Miles Copeland said, "You guys, we're sending you to the UK to record your next record." And it's like Greg and I and Roger, we're excited. Lucky's not excited. That's when Lucky quit, because Roger, Greg, and I, we'd agreed we're going to the UK to record our next record. Lucky says, "I can't go to the UK because I'm going to law school. So you guys are just going to have to schedule this around my being in law school." And the three of us said, "Well, no, we're scheduling this around when the record label tells us we're going to the UK. This isn't about you and your schedule. This is about all of us." And that's when Lucky quit, which was kind of a drag, but he was kind of on his way out anyways. He was tired of all of the partying, or he needed to get serious, and he needed to become a lawyer. So anyways, Greg and I are sitting in a meeting with Miles Copeland and the lead vocalist from Chelsea, a guy named Gene October, who in this meeting, Greg and I, we both, when we walked away from the meeting, we looked at each other and we just thought, that was a complete load of bullshit. That one dude was so cocky and arrogant. It was like, we don't want to have anything to do with him. But the gist of the conversation was, Chelsea's coming over here for their first big U.S. tour. They'd been over here. They played all of the places like the Whiskey A Go-Go or the Roxy or wherever they played in L.A. And now it was time for them to step up and start playing places that held like a couple of extra 100 people, 300 people more than the Whiskey A Go-Go. And the bottom line was, and the Circle Jerks are going to go out on tour with Chelsea, and the Circle Jerks will be opening because Chelsea's going to be headlining. And Greg and I, at that point, looked at each other and said, we need to not really have to listen to any more of this crap, because we'd already done our van tours where we would go out at 3-4 months at a time. And we weren't going to go out opening for this band that had never done like a real U.S. tour. Can you hear my phone ring?
Yes.
Okay. That's what happens here, because I'm sitting on my couch next to my landline. I'm not cellular. I'm surprised because the all of the lawnmower, weed whacker, lawn trimmer people haven't showed up today. I guess they're going to be here in about an hour. But I also live under the emergency helicopter flight path for the Children's Hotel. I mean, the Children's Hotel.
Hospital, yeah.
Hospital. Yeah, the Children's Hotel. Yeah, Mom and Dad, I'm running away from home and I'm booking myself a room at the Children's Hotel on Sunset Boulevard.
Ben paid them all off, so they're going late today.
We're only a block away from Cheetah's Strip Club on Hollywood Boulevard.
I think it's cool that you live a block away from where the exact location you were born, right?
It's a little bit longer than a block.
Well, 3 blocks.
But to go there in an emergency vehicle with the paramedics, it's like $1,500.
Right. You might want to get you trying to drive you.
We have to take you to the hospital. You being a diabetic, you could go back into a blackout, and we can't have that. So we got to take you to the hospital.
Yeah.
So I've done that twice, and my final bill at that time, it was like $1,250 because the bill that I was presented was for 2 of these block and a half, 2 block rides in the emergency vehicle, totaling $2,500.
Yeah. We just have a few more questions we wanted to ask you, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with us. Tell us about the Jan and Dean incident at SIR Studios in 1982, I would guess, is when this happened.
I'm terrible with dates, so I couldn't tell you the date, but the Circle Jerks, for the recording, the first recording for Faulty Products.
Wild in the Streets LP, yes.
We were rehearsing the songs for that album, and we were in one of the smaller rooms, which was fine. It sounded great. Bring beer in there. One day we actually had about 20 friends come in, just hanging out. I don't think SIR liked that, but there was an entrance at the back of the building where there wasn't a lot of traffic, so we had told all of our friends, just come through the back door, and nobody will see you. Don't make a big commotion. Just come in and hang out, and we ended up playing all of the songs we were rehearsing for our friends. The rehearsal studio next to us, the lockdown in that studio was Motley Crue. And we kind of made friends with them in a really weird roundabout way when going back to the very beginning of the Circle Jerks on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood, out on the corner of San Vicente and Hollywood Boulevard at the Whiskey A Go-Go. Because Lucky lived across the street above the Shell station, and Motley Crue lived up the hill. I don't know if you saw that movie, the Motley Crue movie, which was actually a lot of fun, and there was a lot of goofy shit going on in that. But we'd become drinking buddies with them in front of the Whiskey A Go-Go. I mean, what else can you do on a Tuesday night besides go and hang out in front of the Whiskey A Go-Go and listen to whatever bands were playing there, if you cared about them or not? Anyways, Motley Crue had the rehearsal space next to us locked out. One night, one of the owners of SIR got drunk, like blind-ass drunk, and thought he was going to come into one of the big rooms and start playing piano. And I guess he got frustrated. He was drunk. He was angry. And he just started banging on the keys of the piano to the point where the piano was ruined. Like he was just hammering on the keys to the point where they couldn't be tuned. They were like broken. Like, I don't know if they could even be replaced. And then he left, leaving this broken piano there in the middle of the room. And one of the crew members, and I don't mean Motley Crue, I mean one of the people that worked in the studio, saw this piano and immediately blamed it on the punk rock guys. So the next day we come in to rehearse, and we're told that we have to leave. Just pack up all of your stuff and get out of here. Like now, like immediately. No practicing, no camaraderie, no joke telling, no conversing. Just get the fuck out of here. You know, and it could have just as easily have been Motley Crue, but it was one of the owners, and as it turns out, SAR Studios at one point in time was owned by Jan and Dean. It was like where they went to rehearse, you know, where they went to write songs. So it was one of the members of Jan and Dean. I don't know if it was Jan or Dean or Jan or, you know, whatever order they come in alphabetically, height, you know, or if it's by weight or, you know.
It was Jan.
Or whatever.
It was Jan. I talked to Jan and Dean's biographer, Joel Selvin, and I relayed the chapter in your book about that. And I said, which one was it? Actually, I didn't even ask him. And he goes, it was Jan. So there's your answer.
Okay.
Just tell us about Wild in the Streets. According to your book, it was recorded, and your book is great, and everyone should buy it. It's called My Damage. Jim Rulin helped you write it. You talk about the entire Wild in the Streets LP was recorded and mixed in one day. Is that right?
We recorded it at A&M Studios with David Anderley as our producer and Gary Hurstis, our manager, who at one point was doing monitors and front of the house at the Roxy. He'd worked at the Whiskey. He'd done sound for us at the Starwood. They, I guess, let's just say they co-produced the album. And it was a really big deal for us to be at AM Studios. I mean, we weren't in one of the big ultra mega studios. We weren't in the U2 size studio. We were in the You Don't size studio, like Studio D or Studio E or whatever it was. And we had rehearsed those songs to the point where we didn't need to come in and do 3 or 4 takes of each song. We were quite capable of getting what we needed in maybe a couple of takes. And we started mixing after we recorded these songs. We would listen to the song and we would choose which song we were going to use, which track we were going to use, and then maybe there might have been some overdubbing, some guitar overdubs, and that was pretty much it. And I want to say we were all said and done in about 21, 22 hours.
Wow. It came out good. I mean, it came out, it's one of my favorite records.
I've heard varying stories, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, we can't wait for it to come out, get reissued on Trust, whenever that is, later in the year, the beginning of next year. I don't know. I know that's coming out.
I want to say October.
Is that going to have extra tracks on it?
What did we do for? We added some live tracks from. I want to say a recording. It was either up in San Francisco or somewhere up in Canada. Up in Canada.
Wow.
America's hat. Keith, outside of LPs and the shows, one of the most interesting things to me about punk and hardcore is like the lineage of things. Like one thing influences another, which influences another, and so forth. And here we are today, still playing music. Jerry A from Poison Idea, he was on Damien's Turned Out a Punk podcast, and he was saying that Red Tape, like alone, the single song was like the inspiration for Poison Idea starting their band. And then there's this Japanese subgenre of hardcore bands called Burning Spirits. And basically the whole subgenre name checks Poison Idea is like their catalyst for starting like this whole scene in Japan. Were you aware of any of this? And are you aware of any of like the lasting legacies of Group Sex? And how do you feel about that?
All of this legacy stuff and one thing leading to another. And I love Jerry and I love Poison Idea. And then how they helped create this subgenre of Japanese bands playing like Poison Idea or the D beat. Now I'm familiar with the D beat, which is that drummer in Discharge had this thing where he was doing something that like blew all of these people's minds. I think Alan Sturritz from Wasted Youth also created something on drums that a lot of other drummers like gravitate to. I don't really pay attention to all of this stuff though, because when it comes to punk rock and hardcore, I listen to it. And I occasionally see some of these bands performing, but having grown up listening to all of the music that I've listened to in the past and what I listen to now, I don't zoom in on what I've been doing. I mean, granted, right now I'm listening to 25 songs by Off because I've got to learn the lyrics because we're getting ready to record a bunch of these songs. It's been like, I want to say like 7 years since Off put out any recorded music. I mean, we have the Metallica track that's on Facebook and YouTube, but I get in these periods where I'm not listening to punk and hardcore. I'm listening to, like, one of my favorite bands right now is a band called Deer Hunter from Macon, Georgia, or Atlanta, Georgia. I'm listening to what I'll do is I'll zoom in on all of these festivals that are coming up, and I'll look at all of the different bands that are playing. And when I say festivals, I don't mean Punk Rock Bowling. I don't mean Rebellion Fest. Even Riot Fest. Riot Fest has some bands like the Pixies. I would listen to the Pixies. I'm not going to listen to Nine Inch Nails. I just don't care. Not going to listen to Marilyn Manson. I'll go down these lists of bands and I'll go, well, that's a pretty interesting name. Maybe I should listen to them on YouTube. Or maybe I should go to iTunes and go into the shopping center and see if it's available or if I can just like punch it up and listen to it. That's how I'm listening to a lot of music right now. I don't have a list of who I'm listening to or who I pay attention to. It's just there's too much stuff swirling around in my world right now for me to just like, well, today's my day off, so I'm going to listen to Beethoven's Fifth. Or I'm going to listen to the Beatles' Revolver, or I'm going to listen to Never Mind the Bollocks. I don't do a lot of that. I don't really pay a lot of attention to some of the bands that maybe I should pay a little bit of attention to, but I don't. I'm just lazy.
Well, having gone to a million shows in LA over the years, I've bumped into you more than anybody else. So you definitely, you you definitely go to a lot of shows. This is, obviously non-COVID times I'm talking about. So, I think you do your work. You were an A&R guy for V2.
That was actually a lot of fun because I went out, I saw a lot of great bands. I saw a lot of mediocre bands. I found myself in a situation at the Troubadour where I went and saw this band called the Ravionettes, who were actually kind of cool because they would play with somebody like A Place to Bury Strangers, or they certainly would play with Jesus and Mary Chain, or Spiritualized, or Maisie Star. But I'm in this situation where they're doing a showcase at the Troubadour, and the headlining band is The Used, who are somebody that I can't get involved with any of that kind of stuff. It just doesn't interest me. So I see this band, and I would like to introduce myself to them. I want to introduce myself to them, tell them that I really like them, and that I would go back to my boss, and he would go to his boss, and that whole chain of events. But I noticed that once they got through playing, there was a line of about 100 people. You know how big the Troubadour is. You put a line of 100 people in the Troubadour, and it's kind of going out into the lobby and out the front door, out onto the sidewalk. And there are all of these people, and I'm looking at all of these people, and I'm recognizing like 50 of them, and they're all A&R people, and it's like, this is going to be a bidding war, and I'm not even, I'll go back to my guys and say, hey, they're really cool, they're interesting, and we don't want to go there because we don't want to spend the money that is necessary to get this band signed to our label. It's just going to be a big bidding war, and who wants to get involved with that? That's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, Zach, do you have anything else?
No, I really want to thank you for being so generous with your time. And thanks, Ben, for setting it up.
I get $20 per minute. So you can tally this.
We spent all our money paying off the lawn guy coming late. So we didn't hear.
Right, okay.
I have one anecdote to end on. When I was in 9th grade, this would have been 92, 93 at Alexander Hamilton High School in West LA. I took woodshop class, and I made something for woodshop, and it is this. I still have it. Do you see that?
I can see that. And you actually painted it. Was that part of the assignment?
Yeah, it says Circle Jerks, and it's the Skank Kid. And then the woodshop teacher said, I'm not going to give you a grade for this until you go to your dad and ask what Circle Jerk means. And I actually did go to my dad, and I said, what does Circle Jerk mean? And he told me, and then I went back to the woodshop teacher the next day, and I said, I asked my dad what it means. He told me what it meant. And the woodshop teacher goes, good, you got a B.
That's great. Yeah, Keith, thanks so much for your time. It's much appreciated.
That's better than not getting a grade at all. You could have said, I'm not giving you a grade for that. But the whole scenario was great.
I deserved an A. I'm sorry. This is rules.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, your dad got A for giving it to you straight.
Right. A for effort.